Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the World Climate Summit 2019 here in Madrid. In 2010, at the first World Climate Summit in Cancun, we stated our intention to host this event for the next 10 years. Our aim was to create the first platform for bottom-up climate action alongside the COP negotiations. And I'm happy to see quite a few people here today that were also present in Cancun in 2010. Today, we all clearly understand that we need business, finance, and civil society to join forces and collaborate with governments at all levels to combat climate change. The threat of climate change is urgent and represents a potentially irreversible threat to society and the world's biodiversity. As we approach 2030, an unprecedented response is required from all sectors, countries, and societies. The world's various climate-related policies continue to be not ambitious enough and require input and engagement from the private sector, finance, and civil society. From the UN Climate Action Summit to COP25 and heading towards COP26 next year, everyone must come to the table. We hope that World Climate Summit has and will continue to play a role alongside these negotiations, ensuring that the private sector and finance sector have a say and a seat and can collaborate and join forces in order to impact the debate and lead us to the outcome we are hoping to achieve. It's great to see such an array of guests gathered here today as we head into our 10th anniversary event and into such a pivotal COP25. I would like to welcome you all here and hope that you all have an engaging and impactful day. I'm sure that today marks the beginning of another 10 years of World Climate Summit, 10 years of urgently needed climate action, and hopefully 10 years of impact. I would now like to welcome our MCs for the day, Peter Boyd, Resident Fellow at Center for Business and the Environment, Yale University, and also Director for Red Dot Plus, and accompanying Peter, Her Royal Highness Princess Abse Digma, Special Envoy of the President of Burkina Faso for resource mobilization for the SDGs and climate change. Welcome to the stage. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Congratulations. Very welcome all. So, first, allow me to congratulate you because it's not an easy way. It's from the bottom of my heart, really, and to all of you here. We are very happy together to be the MCs. And you see that it's gender balance. So we don't talk about that, but it's balanced. We the private sector showing it. So I'll let you start.
Excellent.
And we'll go with you later.
Excellent.
Please, floor is yours.
So welcome, everybody. It's a full day ahead. It's been an exciting journey to get here. The bit Jens missed was also the Chile to Spain piece in the last few weeks. So welcome all, and a credit to the organizers for shifting everything here. It's been an exciting and critical decade, and we've got 23 days till the next one. So time for action is the hashtag over in COP25. Decade to deliver is maybe our hashtag here in the room. Cross-sector engagement, collaboration, partnerships, and solutions. I've got a couple of asks of you for the day on this COP25 day of rest. In terms of a case of ambition, we've got ambition all round in this room and over in COP. I just took a couple of photos just last night, and ambition is all over the words there and indeed in this room, and hopefully we'll be listening to that today. But the other piece on this day of rest is to think about clarity as well as ambition. Ambition on its own is a sort of sounds good, but like what is actually happening? What we really need is the ambition and the clarity, and two types of clarity to inspire the action we need today. Without that, neither ambition nor clarity, well, they're just blocks. They're just blocks in the way. And then Clarity without ambition is that incremental action that too many corporates and, in fact, all sectors have been doing for too long. So we need both. What do we mean? Clarity in definitions. For instance, clarity in definition of net zero. What's your scope? What's your boundaries? Your emissions reduction paths? Your offsets, your use of offsets, and the quality of those offsets. I'm actually writing a short paper at Yale on exactly what does net zero mean beneath the critical Article 4 of the Paris Agreement. And also there's a clarity in path. If you think of impactful leadership throughout the world, throughout sectors, it's uniting 4 Ps of purpose, clear purpose and intent, priorities, what's important, potential, where should those priorities be, and then performance, linking your actions to milestones and connecting those first 3 intentionally. So that case for ambition plus clarity today. And then secondly, we wanted a case for staying around. David Epstein's written a new book called Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World, taking a wide view, and it's great to have the different sectors in the room taking a wide view. So we encourage you today to look across the breadth of the agenda, live in full width, not just full length, and experiment and meet new people in this room, and get the different perspectives you need in order to make the collaborations we need. And who better to be a co-MC with me than somebody that's been in the halls and also demonstrates true breadth if you see her bio. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Her Royal Highness Princess Abse Jigba.
Thank you, MC. So let's do it that way, very informal. Here, private sector, we are really straightforward, looking to each other in the eyes. What is being discussed in the blue room is executed by us. Then the private sector is in the driving seat. We should never forget that, what the power that we have. Moving from a cold, carbon emitting to a net zero, of course, we can do it. The rules are there, it's a matter of implementing. Private sector have innovation. Rather is going from transport to the supply chain of food. We know technology are there to do so. I think in the different session, we will go through those paths. What I want you also to think in your business, in our business, because I'm from private sector as well, is to see how we can green up. Sometimes it's top down. It's about greening up. The bottom-up approach is very important. If we do so, we can really lift out of poverty the supply chain who make the big corporates. The small fish need the big fish and the other way around. This is critical. And how are we mobilizing finance as well? We're talking about in the other room, in the blue zone, as a negotiator, about the carbon price. How are we going to put a price on carbon? This is something that the private sector also need to come on board and the discussion table, and the multilateral banks as well. And this, I'm very happy to see that the European Investment Bank is there with the sister, Eva Navarro, who's really leading the CELAC countries and environment. This is very important to also see how we can make access to finance, adapt to the tools, and also think out of the box, be innovative regarding how, for instance, least developing countries and the seeds, how we can use part of the carbon credits as an underlying guarantee. This is also the pathway that we're using. Just to illustrate with what we're doing in Africa, what I'm coordinating the West Africa Solar Pact, with the ECOWAS Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. This is 60,000 mini-grids that we're going to launch all the ECOWAS region. We do know that it is business, private sector who really can make the difference. And we need to be together to make that difference and create the green jobs. Profit is not a dirty word, but we can have ethics. And I do know that all of you who's here have ethics. With our brother Jens, who's really take the lead on that. You see the beauty. It's not that easy to get it together here. I know that it's not simple. We always count on you. Please keep up. It's not an easy task, but I know that it's doable. It's really doable, and we can still make profit even more. Moving from billions to trillions, it is possible. And you really having a good quality of air. This is very important for us. And so co-MC, I'll let you announce the panel, the next panel, and I look forward to listen. Please engage, 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 and hug the other one who's next to you, talk to him, and get out of here with business. And next year when we meet, then we can assess what has been done. This is really what business is. Show that we are in the driving seat and we're doing the right thing. I thank you very much, and I will be on the other side. Don't hesitate to come to me as well, in the room of Bristol. Thank you.
So we're going to enjoy living as full width across here, both the app. That's where all the people in this room are on there, including us. The agenda shows you those two different tracks. And always remember the drinks as well at the end. So that's a critical part of celebrating 10 years. You know the Chatham House rules is actually there's only one rule. Really, I think we just got one ground rule across our two rooms here today, which is mutual respect. So that means audience, for the speakers, please listen. They've worked hard to get up here and say what they're going to say. Audience for each other. If you need to take calls, take them outside. And then speakers for each other. If you can please keep to time, and moderators, if you can please keep to time. We've got this similar tactic. We'll start standing and standing closer and closer and closer to you if we feel that we are not running to time. And some of us can shimmy and some of us can just stand. But with that, we want to start at the top level, assessing the barriers and solution of the Paris Agreement, and let's work our way down. And so with that, I want to welcome Princess Abs's sister, Emma Navarro, VP of the European Investment Bank, to kick us off. Thank you very much.
The floor is yours. With your warm applause, please.
Well, good morning to all. Let me start thanking the World Climate for its invitation. It is a great pleasure and an honor to be here in its 10th anniversary of this summit. And as Jens mentioned in the introduction, we have an unprecedented challenge ahead of us. The next decade is our last window of opportunity to avoid catastrophic climate change. And the slogan Chile has chosen for this COP cannot be more appropriate. We are at a crucial moment and it is time for action. We must act fast and we must work together. A solid partnership between the public and the private sector is fundamental. And this is why the discussions taking place today here at the Investment COP are crucial. To succeed in the fight against climate change, we need a strong involvement from the business and investors community. And this is precisely the focus of my intervention today. What is needed to scale up investment to facilitate the implementation of the Paris Agreement, and what role multilateral banks can play in this journey. The outlook today is anything but encouraging. Experts have told us that to contain global warming to a safe level of 1.5 degrees, we need to cut emissions drastically and achieve climate neutrality by mid-century. Yet, global emissions are reaching record levels with no signs of abating. Each new report that is published on the impact of climate change causes alarm bells to ring. According to scientists, we are heading to a temperature increase from between 3 and 4 degrees by the end of the century. If this happens, large areas of the planet will become uninhabitable, with irreversible consequences for the economy and for the people across the planet. However, there are also positive signs today. Citizens around the world are concerned. The societies are moving, especially the younger generations. The business and financial communities are starting to be very active. These trends are very evident here in Europe, where climate has become a political priority. The European Commission is expected to present very soon its European Green Deal to make Europe the first continent to be climate neutral by 2050. Europe does well to take responsibility and a leading role in the international efforts to address this global challenge. Yet Europe is not alone. 77 countries and over 100 cities have committed to net zero emissions by 2050, and I am convinced that more will follow. Addressing climate change is feasible, but we cannot underestimate the scale of the challenges. The transition to a low-carbon neutral society is a complex process that will require a great transformation of our societies and lifestyles. Massive investments will be needed in the next 10 to 15 years to change the face of our societies and economies. According to the United Nations, to achieve the 1.5-degree target, the world will need to invest more than $3.8 trillion every year until 2030 and 50. The financial challenge is huge. No public balance sheet can cope with this challenge in isolation. Also, the high levels of public debts in many countries constrain the possibilities of public investments. It is clear that the private investment and financial markets need to play a key role if we want to undertake these investments. In the capital markets, green bonds can be a very useful tool. The European Investment Bank knows well the potential of its instrument, as it pioneered this market back in 2007 and is today the largest multilateral issuer of this instrument. However, although the green bond market has had an impressive growth in the recent years, it still represents a small segment of the global fixed capital market today. The big question is how to make the financial system channel the financial flows towards the type of sustainable projects that are vital for the transition to a low-carbon future. And the solution necessarily involves making the financial system greener so that investors can take into account climate and sustainability decisions in considerations in their decisions. Here, again, some positive developments are happening. Today, ESG considerations are more and more important for investors. Transparency and disclosure on climate-related aspects and risks are also increasing in the market. And this is key to enable investors to make more informed investment decisions. In Europe, a new European taxonomy on climate sustainable investments is just a few steps from adoption after a landmark decision by the trilogue only a few days ago. This will be an important milestone that will give clarity to investors on what is a green investment. It will provide a common language that will prevent greenwashing in the markets. But not only regulators are responding. Climate risks are attracting increasing attention from the supervisors and central banks. Recent announcements by the Bank of England and also the European Central Bank on their plans to undertake climate stress tests are very telling on the direction the financial markets are heading to. Now, it is important to ensure that initiatives across jurisdictions are consistent, because we know that financial markets today know no border. Public banks and multilateral banks can also play a fundamental role in helping to scale up critical investments for the transition. They can direct capital towards sustainable investments, demonstrating the opportunities and potential returns. They can mobilize and crowd in other investors using their catalytic role and reducing the risks associated to some critical projects. For the EIB, the course is clear. For long, climate action has been one of our top financing priorities. In the last 7 years, we have provided more than 150 billion euros to climate and environment action projects. In this period, we have mobilized more than 550 billion euros of investments to these objectives. This makes us one of the largest multilateral financiers of climate and environment action, if not the largest. Yet, it is evident that the scale of today's climate challenge requires greater ambition. Business as usual is not an option. This is why, a few weeks ago, we approved a new climate strategy, setting our new ambition to confirm our role as the EU Climate Bank. We have set 3 fundamental goals. First, we want to unlock 1 trillion euros of investments globally in climate and environment in the next decade, which we know is the critical decade. We will take advantage of our leverage capacity to accelerate investments needed for the decarbonization. Second, we will gradually increase our financing of climate and environment to reach 50% of our activity by 2025. And finally, and very important, we are committed to aligning all our financial activities to the goals and principles of the Paris Agreement, so that none of our operations harms these goals and principles. A clear example is our firm commitment is our ambitious energy lending policy that we approved also recently. Under this policy, by the end of 2021, we will stop financing energy projects based on fossil fuels, including gas. We have become the first multilateral to adopt such a decision. Let me conclude. The transition to a low-carbon future is challenging, but is inevitable. From an economic point of view, it makes total sense. If we don't act now, the cost in the future will be much higher. Yet, we cannot forget that this transition brings huge opportunities for the economy and the business. This gives us the possibility to modernize our economies and make them more sustainable. The direction of travel is evident for public banks, but it is becoming very clear also for the private sector. Investment opportunities are big. If the right choices are made today, the gains could be sizable. The business and the financial sector are now more aware than ever. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Congratulations, really, for your commitment. We're very happy. So, fellow, oops,
there's a light there.
Dangerous.
Excellent.
I'll let you introduce the next panel.
Excellent, thank you. And to expand on the issues, please welcome Michel Fredeau, Senior Partner and Managing Director, Climate and Energy Global Topic Lead for the Boston Consulting Group. And he'll introduce his panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good morning. So let me go straight into the discussion and invite Carolina Urmeneta, Harry Verhaar, Shankar, Krishnamoorthy, and Dr. Gustavo Fonseca on the panel right away. So we're going to talk about barriers and solution, and I think setting the scene by Emma and the others was important. So we are fortunate to have all representation of the different elements of what we call the climate system, with Carolina representing the government and who is the head of climate change office in the Ministry of Environment, Government of Chile. We are fortunate to have also Harry Verhaar, who is the head of global public government affairs at Signify. We have Shankar Krishnamoorthy, who is VP of Strategy and Innovation, Industrial Development, Research and Technology, and Procurement at ENGIE. And we have Dr. Gustavo Fonseca, director of the programs at the Global Environment Facility, representing finance. So there are barriers. There are also solutions. I would like to introduce the discussion by, before we get into how the systems work together, by maybe asking Carolina about the context. Because the context in which you operate, and you can see that as a major barrier, is the context of just transition. And I think Chile is quite exposed. I must say that France also. And I would like to have your views about how do you see that we can, what we need to do from the government standpoint to lay out the ground so that the business and then the rest can act and do the right action to convince our population of a just transition.
Well, thank you, and good morning to everyone. Well, yes, we are living a crisis in Chile, as also we are living in the region. We have Colombia, Ecuador, France, etc. And this is a social crisis that it has to be, and it is related with just transition, but we always think about just transition related with work, because we always think, okay, we are going to, for example, close this company and what we are going to do with the workers. But it is not only about that, and that I think is the problem. It is about people, because they need to know what are the decisions that we are going to make. People is smarter than we think, and they need, it was saying at the beginning, they need transparency. They need to be involved in how the decisions are going to be made. I think that was the big issue in Chile. In Chile, we have great economic and social indicators, okay? We have good goals. We are going for climate neutrality in 2050. We are going to phase out coal, but none of that things was enough because we didn't listen at the beginning. I think that's the big problem. We must include people in the origins of the decision, and that is the thing, and that is the big issue that is discussing right now in Chile. We have like a month, more than a month of crisis. We have had 3 big agreements with the society, and it is still not enough. We are working on that, but we are going to go out of this crisis because we know how to do it. In Chile, we lived a big difficult moment, when we were like 2 big bands, separate, like really apart, and we are going to go out of this crisis with dialogue, and I think we are going to do it. We have solid institutions, and we are going to make them work. But considering dialogue, that is the big issue, and we are going to do it in that way.
Thank you, Carolina. So yes, I mean, this is important to recognize that there will be winners and losers in this transition. And it's true at the level of all of us and the general public, but it's also true at the level of corporation. And maybe I can turn to Shankar. What is the role of business in terms of helping us in this transition?
A very significant one, simply for the reason that close to 2/3 of emissions are energy related, and businesses have a connection with that, either because they produce electricity or they are consumers as in industry or buildings or mobility. It's businesses all around. So the businesses have a role, not just because they are primarily the ones who are, in a sense, causing all of this, but also because they have the wherewithal to fix it. And the way I think the businesses can contribute is, I'll go back to what Peter was earlier saying, that it's about having an ambition that is clear. I would say setting an ambition, first of all, which is very challenging, and it is stated clearly that, for instance, that I want to go carbon neutral in X number of years from now. That is my goal, and this is my path. And I recognize that while pursuing this path, I have to change the way I'm doing my business today, which means risk-taking, which means playing with new business models, etc. So that's very important. Then I would say that the businesses, and they are doing it, I would say the role of ESG criteria, the necessity of doing responsible investments, the fact of having to issue green bonds, they have to increase. So mine is an energy company, ENGIE, which is the largest corporate issuer of green bonds, but it's only 7 billion. It should be 70 billion for a company. Then we are playing a different game. So that, for me, that ambition thing is important. The second thing is being a bit more demanding of yourself as also of others outside of your core. Okay, by which what I mean is that it's not difficult to do. For instance, we tell ourselves that there are ways of working that we must change. Move, for example, to a zero carbon building in X number of years. It's not related to you producing electricity, or it's about the way you work, the way you live. That for me is an important statement. The other one would be, say, electrify your own fleet. And then, demand of people around you. For example, set a target for your, say, so you tell your procurement department that hereafter in the next 10 years, you're not going to be buying things from people who don't have a certain minimum carbon footprint reduction program. So those are the areas in which businesses can contribute, so I would say, and we can discuss about other things, technology, etc., but I stop here so that others can contribute as well.
Thank you very much. So that means that it's not just at the corporate level. I mean, you were talking about walking the talk and being a role model, but also there were elements about embarking the whole ecosystem into this transformation. And maybe, Ari, you could tell us a little bit what are the challenges and the opportunity of transforming into a green company, which is what Signify has done.
Yeah, so maybe, well, you may have known us in the past as Philip Lighting. We only changed the name because we're now independent company on the stock market, global leader in lighting. So I think indeed, so first and foremost, and that is also the main topic here at COP25, is we need to fix the ambition level, which means carbon neutrality at global level latest by 2050. In September, at the Global Climate Action Summit in New York, our CEO also, let's say, called on companies, and I think certainly all the companies here, to commit to carbon neutrality latest by 2030. We will be carbon neutral end of next year. So I think if we are faster, then we also get the learning, and we leave a little time for the others to catch up. I think also if we fix the ambition level, so 4 years after the Paris Agreement is high time, it will unlock creativity, innovative power, and passion. We see that within our company. And then, as Shankar mentions, it is important to link that to walking the talk. So not only, let's say, saying what others should do, but also walking the talk yourself. So we are the first signatory of the World Green Building Council's Net Zero Carbon Building Program. And actually also in a recent meeting with the EIB, who are also walking the talk, I suggested, well, why not the EIB also join the Net Zero Carbon Building Program for their buildings? Because the learning will also help fine-tune the financing mechanisms. It will give us the learning that is needed to help others. Same way, electric vehicles throughout our corporation, we are working on that. So those are, I think, important elements. And also we see from social unrest, the social unrest is not telling us that we should find ways to keep things as they were yesterday, but it shows that the urgency of making the transition. Because if we don't, then these risks are only going to increase. Whereas if we adopt these projects and programs based on a clear target of net zero, then we create the case studies, the proof points, the jobs. It will demystify what climate action is all about. And that is also, I think, the best recipe against populism. And let me add one last remark to that on the urgency to fix the ambition level. I think we often talk about megatons and kilowatt and terawatt hours, and nobody knows what it is. And even when I read it, I think, okay, how much is this? And then just a few numbers that you can share also with your friends and family or others that you're trying to convince to make it a bit more tangible. So Greenland melting. I think probably also in the past months how you read like, okay, Greenland melting is now increased to 300 megatons of ice per year. Okay, sounds like a lot. Actually, 300 megatons is the annual drinking water intake of 7.5 billion people for 40 years. If you add to that the Antarctic ice melting, actually that means per year the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, inundated by 1 meter of water. So that's actually the magnitude of what is happening in nature. And then, okay, we can talk about other examples, like food and everything. So this is really serious. If you give those examples, and last one, I can't resist, is on actually what does it matter, 1 degree, 1.5 or 2? The simplest way to explain this is to compare it with your body temperature. So the world is now, let's say, at 38 degrees centigrade if you compare it to body temperature, so not feeling very well. And we see that in natural disasters. Imagine 1.5 or 2, if we would be like 39, we would be seriously ill and staying at home. And at 3, you're at risk of survival. So those examples, this is happening to Mother Nature, the planet we live on. And it could help you also to convince others to commit to carbon neutrality. Latest 2050 for all governments, latest 2030 for companies. And if you can do it sooner, please do so.
So thank you for describing the ambition, but I'll come back to you on the barriers because I still need to have some concrete elements about what does it take and how to get there. But before to get to there, let me turn to Gustavo, maybe from the finance standpoint. What do you see the challenges and the opportunities?
Thank you. Let me spend about 30 seconds explaining where I come from. The Global Environment Facility, for perhaps many of you don't know, is one of the financial mechanisms of this convention and also 4 other international conventions, including biodiversity, land degradation, chemicals, mercury, and we also have a very solid portfolio on international waters and transboundary freshwater and marine ecosystems. So it's a very, very broad mandate, and it maps squarely, if you're familiar with the planetary boundaries framework, with that. So we were created, when these conventions were created, to help developing countries to rise to a level playing field where they can be really big players in this. Most of these countries have not had any influence on the problem we're trying to fix. But as we look at the trajectories, a few of these countries, of developing countries, are on track to be the largest emitters fairly soon. So it's very, very important to work in these frontier and emerging markets. And we only work with developing countries. So we are funded by donor countries, the usual suspects, the G7 plus. And we transfer funds from public funds from developed countries to developing countries. So we work from governments to governments. We have to date invested close to $20 billion alongside $100 billion of additional financing. And if we look at the state of the environment, of the global environment today, we have to be humble and say we are failing or have failed miserably given the fact that the trends are really, really not being contained. So we need to do things radically different from what we have been doing collectively over the years. And the small amount of money that the GEF has needs to be made much more catalytic and much more speaking to the creation of these markets for projects and for businesses that can generate the scale of change that's necessary. So we are much more now interested in connecting different lines of funding from climate to biodiversity, land use, agriculture, because this is a systemic problem. It cannot be resolved sector by sector. So our projects are much more now opening opportunities for private sector to working with them on improvement of supply chains, taking deforestation out of commodity production that became a huge problem. 25% of all the emissions now are land-based. And unless we tackle that, we can't make the transition to 45% emissions cut by the next decade, let alone in 2050. So we are much more strategic in the way that we are operating. So we work very closely with multilateral development banks like EIB, for example, EBRD, World Bank, ADB, Inter-American Development Bank, in trying to use our resources, which are primarily grant-based, to leverage additional resources that can come from institutions. So growing the pie and also looking more directly at how markets can be created. And we had a very significant role in the beginning of renewable energy by providing risk financing for solar, for wind, in the early days of the GEF, where now the market has picked up and then it takes it forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So maybe we're going to focus on corporations and taking advantage of your presence and Carolina. If I start with Signify ENGIE, and when you look at your transformation, which has been major in the last years to get to a greener type of operations compatible with the 1.5-degree world. What are the major barriers? Is it finance? Is it regulatory? Is it technology? How do you see that? Maybe starting with you, Shankar.
At a very high level, I mean, if you think about the barriers to getting there, there are tens of them we can discuss, but I'll just focus on one or two that to me seem pretty relevant from my perspective. One is time. Okay, it's the biggest barrier because we started too late. And solutions at the end of the day on the ground are provided by technologies that change the way you do your business, the way you run your affairs. Technologies take a lot of time to be invented, to be accepted, to become reliable, and then over a period of time, they industrialize. They have the scale that makes them affordable. And you don't get always as lucky as I would say one got with solar, which in some market, it's like a price divided by 10 in 10 years. It happens sometimes, but it doesn't always happen. So for me, big barrier is the fact that we're running out of time, and technology can only do so much in a given period of time. A second barrier for me, it's a bit, sometimes I think about it, and I say it's a bit complicated to talk about it, which is that there is a systemic difficulty in, say, swallowing and digesting or accepting too many big ideas at the same time, okay? So whether it's the industry or the society, and I take the example again of, say, renewables. Now, they were a big hit. They have been a big hit, it's great, okay? But then they have problems of their own, intermittency, okay? And then the mind and the industry and the society, everything works, looks at renewables as the solution, and therefore electrification as being the only option, which in my view is not the right way to go forward. And I'll give you examples of, for instance, if you take like today, there are like 200 gigawatt of coal plants in construction in the world. The 200 gigawatt, what they will emit at the time that they are built every year would be like neutralizing the impact of converting every available vehicle on earth into electric. Okay, so it's like you convert 1 billion vehicles to electric, and then you take CO2 off the planet, and then you add the 200 gigawatt. It's a bit more than that. But then there is a solution for that, which is, say, CCS, which hasn't quite taken off because the mind has been busy saying, I'm doing already one thing, which is renewables, and why divert my attention to another one? So those are, for me, two big barriers.
Yeah. And what about you, Harry? How do you see it?
Let's say we cluster barriers in two categories. So one is lack of awareness. People often don't know what is possible, but also how beneficial this is. And the second one has to do with financing, and that's not money, but how to use the economics of the better solutions. On the first hand, then, we have been communicating to our customers, to society, but also to politicians. What are the benefits in the lighting category of switching to better solutions? I've been in many debates at the time in 2006 when we called for the phase out of incandescent light bulbs, which was world headline news. But also there were sometimes in debates where people were crying like, hey, this is disappearing. What is going to happen with my life? But then gradually, then they see like, hey, these better solutions. I'll give one or two examples. We see that there has been a research on 10 cities, including Buenos Aires, Los Angeles, and 8 others. What happened after they switched to LED street lighting? They reduced their energy bill by 50% or 2/3 even in LA. But then also they reduced street crime, so assaults and robbery by 21%. Nighttime traffic accidents reduced by 30%. We see in office environments people are more productive without having to work more hours. And so those kind of benefits we are communicating to politicians. We started at a time when the European Commission was thinking about how to translate the Kyoto Treaty into regulation. And we felt we need to reach out as a company, but also as a lighting sector. So through the Lighting Association, we brought in all competitors. And we said, we need to work for this better future. And we need to show how much lighting matters. And at the time, lighting was 19%, so almost 1/5 of global electricity. Well, last year it was 13, and in 2030 it will be down to 8. So we see a clear decoupling, showing that this is all possible. And on financing, I've worked on that. We all know that better solutions, more durable products and technologies, they are more economical. But then the question is, how do you bring the economics that occur over the lifetime, how do you bring them forward to take away the investment hurdle or the renovation budget hurdle? And there we have launched new business models. We call it lighting as a service. So actually, we have that with Schiphol Airport and a few others. where they no longer pay for the hardware. So they're not invoiced for the hardware. They just pay per month for how much light that they use. We're starting to do the same thing with cities and the like. So that, because actually when we speak to banks, they say we got money and no projects. When we speak to cities and companies, they say we have projects, but we have no money. So we need to look at actually, the ownership doesn't matter. It's the service, the quality of the service that you want. So I think all of us probably are working on these type of models. And that is the way to create the speed. Because the direction we're going with better solutions, I think that's unstoppable. But we need to increase the speed. And this is the way to do it.
Can I just add 30 seconds to financing? So it's true that you talk to a lot of people and then, yes, there is money, but where are projects is a question. But there's also the fact of money chasing relatively less risky propositions. So it's so easy to find money for solar and wind, but it's not so easy to find for something more complex. Okay? So if I were to make a request to the financial community, I would say, okay, have some of your money going into something that is inherently riskier, either as a project or as an invention of a technology. Maybe that support is probably needed.
So we're talking about speed, we're talking about business model innovation and the difficulties. Let me go back to you, Carolina. What do you think the areas where governments and policies can really help companies to overcome these barriers?
Well, I'm going to that, but I will say another thing. We have a lot of things to think, because this is true. We have been really slow, and we are talking a lot about mitigation, about neutrality, about DAD emission, but we must think on adaptation also, which is another thing, and you must consider that because that is the real local thing that is happening, and it will affect the companies and also the citizens that are living there. So that is another issue to the evaluation, and we must consider climate change as a variable in our evaluation, and that is related with risk, and that is related with finance company. Because when finance industry consider the risk associated to climate change, they could help us in order to find finance. And regarding what governments need to do, we need to have political will. That's a big issue. Because when you have political will, you can do things. For example, in Chile, we are now in Santiago, the capital of Chile, the major city with the most electric buses in the city, outside of China, of course. And that was due because we find a model, a financial model, and that was only capable because we have political will, because you have like technical people doing things, in a desk, and they say, no, this is not possible, this is too much invest, and no, this is not the way. And when you go and say, yes, find the solution, find it, well, you find it, and now we have a lot of electrical buses in Chile, and this is really well received by the people, because they didn't make pollution and they have less noise, so it is great for people. So I think the big issue is to have political will and then make it do it, because when the government makes good signal for the private sector, then you can do things. That's the thing.
Thank you. And coming back to you, Gustavo, do you think that there's not enough projects? There's not enough projects. That's what I heard. There's a lot of financing without projects, or there's a lot of finance, a lot of projects. Do you think that the lack of opportunities to invest, or not?
Yes and no, depending on the type of project that you're trying to really push. I would say that it's true that we have many opportunities to engage with private sector in profitable deals and structures, but the fact of the matter is that the market, for the most part, does not understand these new products. So we need to make them these new asset classes that can be aggregated, can be traded, And for example, what we do in agriculture, biodiversity, water, these projects are typically in the order of 20, 30, 50, $100 million. And if you're talking to a pension fund that has a lot of capital that wishes to deploy in a different way, they don't have the attention span to really try to understand these deals. So it's predicated on us to create these new asset classes, make them known to the market like renewables today have been, so that they can become vehicles that can take this up. So how do you accelerate that process? And we do have a window for de-risking investments in emerging markets, particularly for these new businesses that are largely unknown. So we provide technical assistance to bring these projects to the bankable stage, and then we have a series of other investors ready to move with this. So, but we want to do it correctly and at the right market, pricing, because in renewables, for example, it's very difficult for us now to find arguments that any business in this area, for the most part, needs concessional capital. The commercial market can take time of this. But for other deals, we might want to introduce guarantees. We might want to do some risk sharing. We have instruments that we can take first loss positions in new deals, provide equity, provide concessional financing, and through this, attract more commercial capital. And through this also get these new deals to be more well-known to the market, and so that we can expand. But we are not really accelerating the transformation that's needed fast enough. So as we tweak with the thermostat of the planet, if you want to talk in those terms, we really need to accelerate this. And without the private sector being more risky, risk-taking in this, is going to be really difficult for public institutions like ours and others to follow that trend.
Yeah. There's one element, and then I will turn back, so prepare your questions. We might have time for one or two questions from the audience, but when I listen to you, I think one of the items, because if we want to go very quickly, and speed is important because of the emergency of the problem, and we have acceptance from the public, what about, your sense about your role in educating the different stakeholders, educating your customers, educating your suppliers, educating your citizens, and the people that, the investors? Maybe someone wants to comment?
Maybe also building on Gustavo's remark, then, so we absolutely do that. And there's also some good news. I think, first of all, generically, the good news is that change is not linear. So if we project, we're very concerned, but change is not linear. We see that in the lighting sector. And I'll get back to the aggregation remark and financing and get into bigger scale. All those new technologies are digital, which means, in the case of lighting, like 10 years ago, 2/3 of our sales volume was incandescent light bulbs. Last quarter, 80% LED. End of next year, all our LEDs will be IoT connected or connectable, which means they get an IP address. So you can move from small projects, one street light at a time, or let's say one room in a building, to city scale, to company scale. So you see that the stakeholders we're talking to are changing. And then also the JEF and the EIB, EBRD, they come in, commercial banks come in, because then you can aggregate, you can consolidate all those many little bits of energy efficiency. And energy efficiency has to do half of keeping us close to 1.5 degrees centigrade. Then you can create the bigger projects that are easy to finance. As it's digital, there's an automatic guarantee, quality and performance guarantee in it. So I think that is really good news. So there's education to the public, but also then education, let's say, amongst the ones who need to bring the finance and the projects together and to make them happen, because that's the speed that is needed.
Our role is also, it's to do with, so we are businesses, if I see from the perspective of, say, my company, the role is, first of all, risk-taking of a kind that shows that you are in it for real. So the walking the talk is one aspect. The other is risk-taking, and the third is, getting your strengths, which is, say, technical expertise, or your ability to structure something, a financial product, make available to somebody whose core business it is not to deal with energy. So you go to someone who says, okay, he runs his core business very, very well, but then we say, we are here to provide you as a service solutions, putting our money or those of others, and guarantee you the performance to make you move to a situation where your carbon footprint is lower. So at the end of the day, it's business risk-taking, making changes in the business model, and then making your expertise and strengths available to others to help reduce your carbon footprint. That's our role.
Yeah, just a quick note on this. I think the best model for education in this space is showing where the successes are coming from, because success breeds success. And just to give you a couple of figures from our de-risking window, the most recent set of deals we've done with $90 million in about 11 projects. We could have deployed those $99 million without any private sector investment. It's not required, but we did it with that purpose. That $99 million leveraged $1.7 billion in additional financing. So the scaling that you can get by finding the right sweet spot and then helping this experience to be widely disseminated in the market, and particularly, and I will tell you this, educating the public sectors, the governments, the negotiators who are in the other zone there, because it's not clear to them yet what the role of the private sector is in boosting transformation. If you look at the national determined contribution, the NDCs, which should be the most important policy signals that we have and you all have to act, they still don't articulate the private sector engagement in the way. So if you commit to restore 20 million hectares of land by whatever date, they don't have the mechanisms to actually get to that commitment. And Carolina, Chile has been a partner to the GEF for ages, and you guys do very good jobs and use the GEF money very well, including on the transport and mobility side of things. You have now joined us in our electric mobility program. But do you agree with me?
Can I? It's okay? Okay. Yes, I agree with you, and I have two things. I think the business companies are in a best position to change than the governments. Governments, we are slow, and it's difficult because this is my first time in governments, and I see how slow it is. So we need your help, and I think regarding education, one really important thing is how we communicate things. And how we said things to the press, for example, and how we do like big companies or big slogans, to reach people. Because most of the time we are not education people about sustainable production, for example, okay? And we say buy. But you don't need to buy a lot of things, and you need to produce like in a sustainable way, and that is a big opportunity for companies, And that, I think, is a big talent to educate people in order to see that this is the new way to develop.
So we have time to take one or two questions. So. You. You don't have a microphone.
My question goes to Shankar in ENGIE. You spoke about walk the talk. Has ENGIE set a target year for which you will stop investing in fossil fuels and direct all investment capacity to renewables?
We stopped developing coal plants some 5 years ago, and then over the period of the last 5 years, reduced the coal capacity either by a complete shutdown or by selling it in circumstances where the governments needed those coal plants to be there, but we are not associated with them. We stopped all businesses associated with that. And one by one, we get out of it. A second thing that we are doing, and which is perhaps potentially even more impactful, is that we are investing into greening the gas. So we believe that at the end of the day, the renewable electricity is not going to be the only solution, into which we invest a lot, incidentally. All our projects, almost everything that in the last 4 years we have done is renewables, but we think that that's not the only solution. So bigger impact is via the greening of gas. And so a lot of money is going into making biogas and making hydrogen, or rather green hydrogen, work. And that's our effort at the moment. So we believe that if we get a little successful, little bit more support from the rest of the ecosystem, these two could take off. and they will offer a very good complementarity to renewables.
No answer. What was the answer? Sorry? What was the answer? What year do you stop investing in fossil fuels?
No, as I said, we stopped developing 5 years ago.
No. Oil, gas, coal.
No, we are not in, we got out of oil 2 years ago. So we got out of coal 5 years ago. And insofar as natural gas is concerned, so our belief is that at the end of the day, you need gas, okay? You do need gas, that's our belief. And what we are doing is to green the gas wherever it can be greened, and where it's not possible to green it in the near foreseeable future, we are not going there. So that's what our answer is.
So, Mr. at the end here, yeah, at the back of the room.
I would like to raise two questions. One is corruption. One is corruption. For the last 3 years, I've been trying to do renewable energy projects in a South Asian country, and we have not been able to go through because of corruption, because there are vested interests in continuing coal and gas plants, because the functionaries and the politicians are getting money from those projects. They don't want to abandon it and go into solar. And even when you want to do solar, you have to pay. And I'm working with a company, I come from France, who don't want to pay, and I agree with that, so we are blocked. And this question of corruption, I think it is very important, because the other thing that has not been raised here is the size of the projects. You're all from big companies. If I may make a short
what is your question?
With Mr.
Maybe you go to your
Fonseca.
question.
I want to give an example. I also do through partners reforestation. And I was asked in the country in which I was asked by a local NGO, because I'm from also with the French NGO which does reforestation around the world. I was asked by a local NGO whether we could help them to finance a project. And then they sent me a letter from the Deputy Minister of Environment, who says...
Hello. Can you, I'm sorry, but can you make it a bit short? And
yes, okay, I will make it short.
We would like, the moderator would like to engage, but maybe you can take it out offline.
Okay.
Thank you for your understanding.
Okay, but this is important, because the letter from the Deputy Minister states that our national determined contribution, we took the commitment to go from 29 forest cover to 32. We have land, but we don't have the finance. So I said, but there is the Global Environmental Facility. Why can't you get it? And this is a problem.
I think we got your point. Let me
just
go.
one phrase, please. This is a problem of doing smaller projects. Thank you.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. Look, corruption is also something that needs to be taken into account. The time is running, so I just wanted to thank you for the discussion. And I think that, speed is going to be the issue, of course. But as we move forward, I think the alignment of interests, which makes it an opportunity, and as people will understand that the future, the transition, the future is a better future, I think that all planets will align. But it's a tough journey to get there. So I wanted to thank you very much for the discussion. Thank you.
See.
Thanks very much to the panel. We're now going to split into two tracks. And actually, we've got a third track as well, hosted as well. So here in Londres, or London, as you say with the Scottish accent, is the future of energy, decarbonising the system. Just across the hall there, building smart cities, the role of net zero technologies with my co-MC. And then there's also...
Here. Just follow the SDG jacket.
There you go, the SDG jacket, exactly. And then there's the third piece, public-private collaboration to develop sustainable and smart cities, hosted by Signify. So I'll leave you like 1 to 2 minutes only to kind of take your pick and move, and then we've obviously got to keep going and keep to time. And as you're moving, just remember, a question is a short sentence with a question mark on the end. Thank you very much.
My mic has been shut down. No, but now it's working. No, I will take I will get it set.
To the first of the sessions here. So this one, the title of this session, leading us up to 11 o'clock, and then we'll have plenty time for chats and coffee at 11. This session now is the future of energy, decarbonizing the system. So to help us frame this issue and opportunities up, please welcome to the stage Kimberly Henderson. She's partner in the sustainability practice at McKinsey and Company.
Thanks, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here. So I know the title is about energy, but I'm actually going to talk about a bit more than energy. So climate risk and how to get on a 1.5 degree pathway. For those with short attention spans, there's four key messages here. So one is the base case outlook, business as usual, already looks like dramatic change. Two, that base case outlook leads to runaway climate change. Three, to stabilize the climate, there are 10 requirements, 10 things that we must do. And as many have mentioned already, the next decade is critical. So the business as usual pathway has a huge amount of renewables being deployed to 2050. It has a doubling of electricity in the energy system, and renewables takes majority share. That's with no new policies. That's business as usual. That's economics. Okay? That looks incredible, right? That's like massive decarbonization of the power system and massive electrification. That gets us about a 20% decline in our fossil fuel emissions. So if we look at emissions and how those are projected to evolve over the next 30 years, what we see is that coal, oil, and gas, the black and gray, declines, but not nearly enough. And we have ongoing, it's cut, okay. And we have ongoing emissions that are process emissions, agriculture, and growing deforestation. And we lose the carbon sinks from the forests. So this gets us pretty far from a 2-degree pathway and much farther still from a 1.5-degree pathway. Clearly this isn't good. A few facts around climate risk and what this means. I'll show one example in Europe, given where we are today. So this is a map of drought frequency in Europe in the 1950 to 1980 period. And the light yellow, which is most of the chart, means you're in drought about 10% of the time. Okay. So you can look at where Spain is, look at Italy, say, okay, that's not very frequent. If you look at the legend, the far end, the red, would mean you're in drought most of the time. So projecting forward to the 2040s, what scientists expect is that drought frequency in Europe will look like this. That means essentially the Sahara moves up and jumps the Mediterranean. It means Southern Europe is in drought most of the time. This is not very far away. Now that's potentially not even the scariest of things. What's really disturbing is the risk of feedbacks. And this is a sophisticated audience, so many of you will be familiar. But climate change drives certain changes in the Earth system that then cause more climate change, more global warming. So we've mapped those feedbacks against the temperature increase. And so the spectrum here is the risk of the feedback activation, red being very high risk. And the best estimates of scientists are here. So there's a set of feedbacks that could happen anywhere between 1 and 3 degrees. Loss of Arctic summer sea ice, loss of alpine glaciers, collapse of Greenland glacier, collapse of West Antarctic ice sheet. We start the spectrum at 1 because we're already at over 1 degree Celsius, just to be clear. There's another set of feedbacks that happen in the 3 to 5 degrees range or are projected. So for instance, forest dieback, Amazon boreal forests. And then there's a further set that are expected when you're in the 4 degrees plus range, which is collapse of East Antarctic ice sheet, which is enormous, accelerated permafrost melt, which releases methane, and loss of Arctic winter sea ice. Now, in a business as usual pathway, we are easily in this range. So we are easily triggering many, if not most, of these feedbacks. You can see why scientists have called for a 2 degree or better, a 1.5 degree max. So the next 10 years are critical. So this is an illustrative chart to show the emissions decline you need to stay within the carbon budget of 570 gigatons. This is if we start reducing emissions today. Now, just to illustrate what happens if we don't start reducing emissions today, we've done 2 other pathways. One is if you keep emissions flat, and the other is if emissions keep growing and business as usual. To stay within this carbon budget, this is the decline that you would need to see. That is clearly impossible. And so there really is not time to wait. The next 10 years, it's not about putting in place the foundations for rapid declines later, it's about making rapid declines now. So, what's needed? We have mapped out 10 requirements that we see as critical to stabilize the climate, and you need all 10. They are, 1, reducing demand through energy efficiency, like energy efficient lighting, process optimization, circular economy. 2, 3, 4, and 5 are around how we power and fuel our lives. So this includes electrification and decarbonization of the power sector. It also includes hydrogen. It also includes bioenergy. The Third category is scaling up what we've called a carbon management industry, but carbon capture, usage, and storage, developing markets for negative emissions or carbon dioxide removal, and stopping deforestation and reforesting at scale. Unfortunately, we cannot build a pathway that does not involve negative emissions at this stage. That we do need them. And then finally, which is something that's often overlooked, is tackling other greenhouse gas emissions. This is not just about carbon. Methane and nitrous oxide have together contributed nearly as much global warming as CO2 has. And to address the other greenhouse gases, we need to reform our agriculture and food systems. We need to eliminate fugitive methane emissions in fossil fuel value chains. The amount of methane emissions from coal, oil, and gas value chains is enormous and overlooked and underestimated. So what do these mean? I'll show a few examples. So for power demand, I told you business as usual power demand is expected to double. For a 1.5 degree pathway, we estimate that power demand would need to triple. So by 2050, we need to triple power demand globally. In parallel, we need to decarbonize the power system. And this means building out a lot of renewables. So from today, we're building about 100 gigawatts of solar a year, about 60 gigawatts of wind. We would need to at least quintuple that build rate by 2030. So 500 plus gigawatts of solar, 500 plus gigawatts of wind per year. Deforestation. I said I would talk about more than energy. So deforestation is critical. There's no way to get on this pathway without addressing deforestation. And I know this is hard, there's geopolitical issues, but this has to be done to be on a 1.5 degree pathway. So if projecting forward, if we keep to current deforestation rates, we'd be deforesting an area twice the size of Greenland by 2050. That needs to get down to an area closer to the size of Mongolia. We need an 80% plus reduction in deforestation rates in the next 10 years. And then reforestation. I told you there's no way to get on this path without carbon dioxide removal. And we have some estimates for bioenergy and carbon capture, for direct air capture, but what we see as most scalable in the near term is reforestation. And the amount of reforestation we need to do is depicted by the states here. So by 2030, we would have to reforest an area the size of Montana, North and South Dakota, and Iowa. For the non-Americans in the room, which is probably most of you, Montana has the land area of about the size of Norway, slightly larger than Japan. So that gives you some metrics to gauge how substantial this is. This does not include reforesting to compensate for forest loss to fire, which, given the drought map I showed you previously, you can imagine that could be significant. And we would need to reforest an area equivalent to what we lose from fire in addition to this. Diets would need to change. So if the global population of cows were a country of itself, let's call it the Republic of Cow, it would be one of the highest emitting countries on Earth. And that's from the methane emissions related to cows. Now, this is just one of those unfortunate realities. If there's anyone in the room who still eats beef, you should stop. We need to reduce our beef consumption considerably globally to be on a 1.5 degree pathway. The other major source of methane emissions, which I mentioned earlier, was fossil fuel value chains, fugitive emissions in the gas system, in oil production, in coal beds. If we were to plot the fugitive emissions from the fossil fuel industry on this chart, it would be bigger than cows. So the top two contributors of methane are contributing greenhouse gases on the scale of US and China. So methane is very important. All right, so we've talked a lot about how the next 10 years really matter. And I'm going to show you what our analysis shows would need to happen in the next 10 years. So we've done this based on CO2 emissions, this pie here. And so we're about 40 gigatons CO2 emissions in 2016. And if we look at the reductions we would need in the next 10 years, we would need about 10 gigatons reduction from renewables deployment. We would need about 4 gigatons from electrification, 3 from reforestation, reducing demand, stopping deforestation, a number of other things there, hydrogen, bioenergy, carbon capture. And that would leave us with 17 gigatons per annum in 2030. Now, the deploying renewables here is clearly the biggest. This is also one of the most fraught because as much as renewables are competitive, they are cost competitive today with new build. By 2030, they will be cost competitive with the marginal cost of running existing coal and gas plants. So they are competitive. But if I look at where that 10 gigatons comes from, the vast majority is displacing coal plants in mostly China and India, and the vast majority of those coal plants were built in the last 15 years. So this is exceptionally hard. And that's just CO2. So if we look at what needs to happen for the other greenhouse gas emissions, we would see by 2030 about a 50% decline in fugitive methane, about a quarter decline in global consumption of beef and lamb, and 20% fewer nitrous oxide emissions from agriculture related to fertilizer. So all that to say, this is very hard. We talk a lot about net zero by 2050, and I am so happy to see countries and companies around the world embracing the net zero by 2050 target, and that is a target that we need. Arguably, we need a pretty strong 2030 target because there's no way to be anywhere close to a 1.5 degree pathway without significant action in the next 10 years. So, thank you.
Thank you, Kim. And to help us dive into some of the issues and opportunities raised, please welcome up Mathilde Wastafer, excuse my Scottish accent, Director of Sustainability of Technology and Outlooks of the IEA, and she'll introduce the panel.
Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Mechthild Worsdorfer, Director of Sustainability and Technology at the IEA, International Energy Agency. And I'm very pleased that we had now a good first presentation. Thank you very much, Kimberly, to set the scene, to describe the challenges ahead, not only 2050, 2030, and what is the next steps in the ambition level. We heard a lot about renewables, but also other technologies. So I'm very pleased that we have a very distinguished panel today, and we will discuss some of the issues we just heard. So I would like to invite the Chilean Minister of Energy, Juan Carlos Jobet, who is leading the Chile path to carbon neutrality. We'll hear a bit more. The floor, please come aloud. I would also like to the panel here on the floor, Christian Rinning-Tønnesen, who is the CEO of Statkraft. Statkraft is a Norwegian company leading in the renewables sector. So please.
Thank you.
Then as a third panelist, I would like to invite Itai Dadon, who is the global head of Smarty City product marketing of Itron, and he's leading the global smart cities and Internet of Things activities in the company. And as I learned, also he speaks 5 languages, so we can switch languages if need be. As a fourth panelist, I would like to invite on the panel here Ken Isono. Ken is a CEO and founder of Shisen Energy, and he's leading a few renewables energy power projects, which helps the transition to a 100 renewables powered planet. The floor. So the topic of this panel is Future of Energy, Decarbonization. We heard from Kimberly how difficult it will be and what are the different options what we must take. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, has set in the last World Energy Outlook, published a few weeks ago, different pathways, different scenarios. And one of them, the Sustainable Development Scenario, which is compliant with the Paris Agreement, highlights a few of those technologies. We heard it before, energy efficiency as the first one, and the needed one, the first fuel, and then renewables. All kind of renewables which we need to decarbonize further. But then there are certain sectors where we probably need other technologies. And my first question will be to the Minister of Chile, Juan, what kind of technologies do you think are the most valuable in the future decarbonization? What are the advantages and disadvantages from your point of view?
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here on a Sunday morning. That shows your commitment with climate change, which makes me happy. Well, in Chile, we are in the midst of a very aggressive plan to replace our coal generation capacity. We can discuss a little bit about that later. But one of the main technologies that will allow us to do this are obviously renewable energies. We have an enormous renewable energy potential. I think the main benefits of renewables are pretty obvious. They're clean, obviously. In our country, as in many countries, they're very abundant, right? And they are already very cheap, right? So that's obviously the advantages. The main disadvantage or challenge is that they are intermittent, right? So how do we have systems, matrix that are flexible enough to accommodate those technologies to be able to serve demand well, right? So we're looking into ways to combine renewables. So one, it's obviously storage, right? So batteries, as you know, is a very good option. Batteries are modular, so you can have different solutions for different problems. You can have batteries in your, watches and in the, power generation facility, cars, everything you want. You can have local solutions. That's pretty good. Their design is relatively simple, right? Its cost, I think it's the main challenge or question mark. It's expected to drop probably by half in the next couple of decades. Many people investing there. But the problem is that they are still very expensive. We have seen safety issues with batteries in South Korea. Amazon had an episode recently. So safety is another issue. Batteries are still too heavy. So for transportation, for example, we have a lot of mining in Chile. For transportation of mining, batteries probably won't work. They're too heavy to work there. And as you know, they cannot store electricity for long periods of time, right? So batteries can play a very important role, but we are still not there. We also think that hydrogen, green hydrogen, can also play a very important role. As you know, water, it's very abundant, so that's good. Or still very abundant. We'll see what happens in the future. It's 100% clean if you produce it with renewable energies. It has many different applications, not only in the energy sector, but in agriculture, in explosive and other sectors, which might help us gain the scale that it's required to reduce cost, which is, again, I think the main challenge in hydrogen. The technology is already there, but we need scale big enough to reduce costs. And we also need to work on the regulation that is required to have hydrogen produced and consumed in a massive scale. I think nuclear is another option. In our country, I don't see room for nuclear. It's very expensive to invest in nuclear. The capex required is very, very high. And in Chile, at least, and I think this is true in many other countries, communities and NGOs, many people oppose nuclear. So I think that's one of its main disadvantages. And also there's an issue with waste, right? Nuclear waste. What are we going to do with that if we invest more in nuclear? I think those are the main technologies I see. There's also CCUS, which still is very expensive, cannot be applied in every facility. I mean, but it has the benefit that it can allow us to use existing capacity, right? So, and reduces obviously CO2 emissions significantly, but it's still very expensive. The agency, we were in Paris a couple of days earlier, they estimate that the cost is still like $1 billion per gigawatt of installed capacity, which is still very, very expensive. If you think that renewable energies, you can have 1 megawatt for, let's say, $500,000 or 600,000. I mean, it's still very, very expensive. So that's what I see. One thing that I believe it's important, I think there's no silver bullet here. Whatever we want to do, we'll have to combine different technologies. Since the cost of each technology will evolve in the future, and we don't know exactly how quickly they will evolve. Different countries, I think, need to invest money and put bets on different technologies. And the other thing that it's important is that each country is different, right? So there's no silver bullet, no copy-paste here, and we need to explore different alternatives to have a balanced matrix. But I think it's challenging. So yeah, I'm optimistic, but I think things will change very quickly, and we need to be vigilant to see what will work better in the future.
Thank you very much for that overview. I think we will come back to some of those technologies you are mentioning. Some are still very costly. Some have impressive cost declination, like offshore wind or some of the renewables in different parts. But I would like to ask Itai Dadon, because I think you have been working with different technologies, energy, digital, and so on. What are your views on the future of the different technologies? Can you mention a few examples, please?
Sure. I think we heard a very wide list of different technologies right now. What is really important is that we look at the system as a whole, of what are the choices of different sources of energies that we take, and how do we use that information in real time in order to really improve the decarbonization process in our grid as a whole, and drive an alignment between the economic behavior of people and what makes sense from a decarbonization perspective. Today, there is a misalignment between how people behave, which is based on typical need to save money, okay? But that doesn't necessarily align with the need to save carbon emissions or to reduce carbon emissions. So how do we create that alignment? For example, in the state of California, we have seen a very strong deployment of batteries for storage that has always been seen as an amazing tool of leveraging renewables and decarbonization of the system. But what we at Itron found out is that these batteries actually made the system even more dirty, quote unquote. We were storing energy that was not coming from renewable energy. We were storing energy from carbon, and that's what we were using at times where we could have been using renewable energy, actually, that was abundant. So at the total, the bottom line is, even after the introduction of all these batteries in California, what we did is we just actually created a worse situation than before. And the problem is that people and the system and the utilities or the consumers don't have that real-time information, what is actually going on right now. Are we using energy from carbon? Are we using energy from wind, water, or any other solar renewable sources? And that real-time information can drive a better alignment on the behavior and actually use all these different tools in a way more efficient way.
And what are these tools?
It's data. It's data, getting the data in real time, and that is not available today in most cases.
Okay, maybe we come back to that point as well. Let me turn now to Christian Ronning-Tønnesen. You're the CEO of Statkraft. So what do you think, what are the policy needed? We have the few technologies, some are coming in. We are pushing very, very hard electrification. Electrification will be twice as high as energy demand growth. How do you think can we make sure that electrification, not only of the power sector, but how can we decarbonize also industry, transport, and other sectors?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm heading a company named Statkraft. It's based in Norway. We have been producing renewable energy for more than 100 years, way long before climate change crisis was a reality. And we have development of hydropower and wind in Chile, and we are also a big purchaser of electricity here in Spain from renewable producers. We don't buy from anybody else, and we sell it on to customers that want renewable energy. And as a company, we have made a decision that all new investments shall only be done in renewable energy. I think to address what you just asked is the most important thing, which was also shown by this excellent presentation on Kimberly from McKinsey, what matters the most is to replace fossil electricity with renewable electricity. So simply to have a dominantly renewable electricity system. And secondly, to use as much as possible of that renewable electricity or the mix of electricity dominantly renewable into all other sectors. And that is possible in Statkraft. We have made a scenario. It will be presented in a side event here at 1:30 today, how it is possible. It needs to be in transportation, in industry, and in the heating of buildings. In Norway, for instance, already today in 2019, 70% of all new cars sold are electric. Either 50% are battery electric and the other 20 is hybrid electric, thanks to tax incentives. But we believe that by 5 years from now, electric cars will be cheaper without any tax incentives or other incentives. So we think electrification of small vehicles, of normal cars for people, they will become electric. And by 2050, our forecast is that practically all new cars in the world sold, all the new cars will be electric. I was just testing an electric plane myself this year. It was my first electric flight. That's very brave. Yeah. I can tell you, range anxiety is different when you're in a plane than when you're in a car.
Where did you go for
but to not make it too long, what we need to do is to electrify transportation as much as possible. The rest of transportation could run on hydrogen or a liquid form of hydrogen in a chemical composition. And that hydrogen, of course, has to be produced from renewable energy again. So that is transportation. Also, biofuels will play a role in air traffic and long-distance shipping, which batteries is not at all enough, and hydrogen may also be hard to use there. So the combination of electricity, hydrogen, and biofuels can do the job in transportation and in industry. Also, electrification can do a lot, and hydrogen can bring us more. Buildings should be dominantly heated by heat pumps, using electricity to extract heat from the ground or from the air, and we get roughly 3 times more energy out than the electricity that we put in. So the combination of all this is technically possible, it is economically possible, and now that's why the reason we are sitting here, we need to make it politically possible as well.
Thank you very much. I think what Norway has done, and Statkraft in that context, is obviously very impressive. It's one of the leaders. It's nearly 95% renewables. But there are other regions, as you said. I mean, there is the most polluting energy resources, coal, and we heard also from Kimberly before, the coal power plant in Asia are still very young, 12 years on average. So that is another, so there are regional huge differences. But let me turn to Ken. Ken is a startup CEO of renewables. So what do you think about these new technologies? We heard about storage, green hydrogen. I know Japan is leading or putting a lot of emphasis on hydrogen. Can you say a few words on the new policies?
I see. Let me briefly introduce myself. I'm from Far East. We are started 2011 June. It's 3 months after Fukushima accident, and started with $15,000 as an initial capital. And fortunately, we have developing over 1 gigawatt of renewables in 8 countries now. And not only Asia, but in Latin America, and just started in Africa. Our first project is in Nigeria. And if you, when we see across the globe, there are big opportunities of renewables, not only using the new technology, but existing technologies. So, for example, Nigeria that we are starting, it's a combination of solar and storage that they are paying like 30 cents per kilowatt hour for like operating the mills of agriculture. We can just transform that into renewables. That's very simple. But we're not just providing energy, but we're trying to provide like the mill itself also. So we need, I think, holistic view for the installation that we cannot just be the energy company. We need to go beyond that to change the people's lifestyles. And for example, in Japan, actually Japan is one of the largest, the market for battery storage. It sells 70,000 storage a year. And not many people know that. But the issue is it cannot be remotely controlled. So we cannot use it as a virtual power plant. So this is something we need to, we need a new technology for it. So I think, from the, and the storage is not economically feasible at just itself, but Japan has more multi-purpose in terms of the resilience that we're having the threat from big typhoons now that finally Japanese are, I think, aware of the climate change now. That we had a big typhoon in September, and 50 kilometers from Tokyo, we had blackouts for a week from the typhoon. And so I think, as we all know, that technologies are here, and it's a matter of how we take action.
But what is your wish as a relatively new startup since 2011 to your government or to the government to speed things up? What would help you in your business?
So I think the will, political will, I think it's important that we want to do this. And unfortunately, in Japan, we don't feel much of the will. So, but we cannot just rely on the government. We should create a business model that does not just rely on the government. So in the business model, we just don't go for the large projects. It really highly relates on the political decisions. But there are many opportunities and the needs from each country in the world that, for example, self-consumption, that behind the meter, and then this kind of the model, I think, is very important.
Thank you. Before we come to the minister and the government to tell us from what government can do, I would like to turn again to Itai. What is your views on how to develop and push that further from a business point of view? What would help you to get more decarbonization and more products, technologies on the market?
Right. We heard this morning that we need both the bottom up and the top down, right? I think that is absolutely true. We cannot rely just on one versus another. So if we think about the top down, I think regulatory bodies and especially energy commissions in North America and across the world have a very strong role to play here. Today, utilities are not incentivized to decarbonize their systems. There's nothing there for them. So even if it makes an economic sense, there's no incentive for them to do that. I think it's true also in other regions of the world. So once we, and that goes back to the misalignment between economic reality and decarbonization. Today they're not one and the same. And that's the top down. And the bottom up, I think investment community, since this is maybe the topic of the day, needs to come into play much earlier in the process, already in the R&D phase of the private sector, and that is not something that a lot of people talk about. They cannot just invest in projects. They cannot just invest in as a PPP model or whatever. They have to come into play way earlier to help the private sector and the government's R&Ds to invest in R&D. Innovation has to happen. All those technologies that we're talking about still don't have the price that they need to have and still don't have the maturity and safety. For example, if we talk about nuclear, I think if we were able to show that the safety levels and the recycling capabilities are there, maybe they will be more accepted by our societies and NGOs. And then when they do invest in projects, maybe there is a method of investment that's based on performance. Maybe we can invest based on performance in carbon reduction, and that is another thing that the private sector and the investment community can do to help.
Thank you very much. I fully agree on one of your points, on many of your points, but one on the research and development and innovation. Innovation cycles are still, we have been looking like, for example, solar PV started in one European country, Germany, maybe in the 70s, 80s, 25 years ago more, and it's now 1% of the market share. So it's a long way to be cost effective and until it comes down. And I think there are many other examples, but that needs to be pushed up, certainly.
We get new iPhones every year, but this is not the same cycle of innovation.
No, energy investments are more long term. But please, Christian.
Yeah. In order to achieve what we need, namely quick decarbonization, then the most effective way to do it is to have a price on carbon. Have a price on what we need to reduce. That's what we've done when we got lead out of the gasoline and sulfur out of the fuels. There was a price on sulfur, there was a price on lead. We need a price on carbon. So the NDCs, the national targets of each country should include carbon pricing mechanisms. There's one more point, and that is how do we absorb all the intermittent capacity. I think we are underestimating the role of IT here, the ability for the demand to adjust to the supply. Up until now, our systems has been designed for the supply to follow demand. But with modern technology to control most of the demand, we can turn it around. And the energy system is the same. It's just the IT technology on how we govern it that needs to be changed. And that can be done within few years. It can really change the whole energy system at the speed of IT, at the speed of how we introduce mobile phones and so on.
So very good. So you had basically 2 points on the
price of carbon and the role of IT in adapting the electricity demand to supply.
What price of carbon would, in your case, trigger a more urgent decarbonization?
It needs to be around where it is in Europe now on 25 euros per ton. If it was up to 50 euros per ton, it would really speed up the development a lot. So 50 would be like a target. It shouldn't be too high because then it will be too high cost for the people paying for the energy. So there's a balance point. My advice is 50 euros per ton.
Okay. In Europe, we had seen an increase in the last year, but I think you're right. We need probably much more in the coming to take action. You wanted to come in quickly. No.
I just wanted to add one more thing, and I think people don't think about it as much as they should, but diversity is another important point that maybe has nothing to do with technology and not regulation or anything, but we see that diversity in, at least for the private sector, has a very strong direct impact on the output and the push towards decarbonization and clean energy.
Diversity of different people?
Diversity
gender?
means in gender and in where people come from, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. A good point. We have been working on that last week as well. I would like to invite the minister to share his experience, having listened to others, and also explain maybe what Chile is doing even more to prepare for next COP.
Yeah, well, thank you. I really agree that leadership and political will, I mean, it's essential. It's irreplaceable. If we don't have that, I mean, we will not be successful. Our president decided last year to commit Chile to be carbon neutral by 2050, right? Many countries have assumed that commitment, but I don't think there are many developing countries and small countries that have assumed that commitment, which I think it's a good signal of political will. And we also are revising our NDC. We will formally announce it in March, but it's already public, and we opened room for our people to make comments on it. But the draft we are sharing with our people, it's a reduction of 45% of emissions by 2030. That's assuming a portion with international support, right? But that's aggressive as well. And I really agree that we need an ambitious goal for 2050, but that's too, I mean, it's too much time there, right? So we need a shorter term target, otherwise it will be too late to hit the 2050. So what we're doing, basically our plan is very simple in essence, is what Christian said. We want to clean our electricity generation capacity and then replace fossil fuels in other sectors of the economy with electricity. That's to put it simply. So in the electricity segment we have last year, we produced almost 40% of our electricity with coal, right? And the average age of those plants, it's 17 years. And if you take, there are 28 plants. If you take out of the sample the 3 oldest ones, the average age is 11 years. So they're pretty young, right? So nevertheless, we reached an agreement earlier this year with all the companies that own those plants to phase out all of those plants by 2040. That's a very aggressive plan, we think. The 4 companies agreed to do that with no compensation. And all of them are making big investments in renewable energies to replace that coal generation capacity. We have the best solar irradiation in the world in the Atacama Desert in the north. In 2012, we had only 3 megawatts of installed capacity of solar. Today, we have 2.5 gigawatts. And we have a pipeline of $10 billion being developed in renewables. More than 90% is renewables. And another $10 billion that's navigating the environmental approval process. So we have a very aggressive plan to replace coal with renewables. The main challenge for us is flexibility, as we have been discussing, right? How do we combine that with renewables with other sources? We are developing a flexibility strategy that I don't have to discuss it. I don't have time to discuss it deeply, but 2 things that I believe are important. First, we will not pick technologies. The government will not try to make a bet on which technology will be successful. We just want to give economic incentives to whoever provides flexibility to the system. And the second thing I believe is important, we're going to give incentives both to supply and to demand. If it's a mining company that can adjust their production or an industry to provide flexibility to the system, we believe we should give them also the economic incentives, as Christian said. The other big challenge for us is transmission lines. We have many people that oppose coal, but they also oppose transmission lines. So part of my job is to explain, guys, when you build a coal plant, you can bring the coal to the plant. But if you build a solar plant, you need to go and get the energy and bring it to where it is consumed, right? So that's a difficult sell sometimes with communities, NGOs, and some political actors. So transmission lines, and the geography of our country, for those of you who have seen it in the map, it's very long and narrow. So transmission lines, it's harder, right? The other thing is we believe hydrogen can play a very important role for the reasons we discussed earlier. Energy efficiency, it's also a very important part of our equation. I still struggle with how little we as a planet, I would say, we are expecting from energy efficiency. Kimberly said, if I remember the number correctly, like 3% reduction in demand, which I think it's very low. With this room, we're being very energy efficient, I would say. But if you look around outside this room, we usually have more consumption that we need. So I think we really need to think on business models that can make energy efficiency happen, right? Because I think energy companies don't have the incentive to foster energy efficiency. I think we have an issue there. We need to think about that. Maybe companies, instead of being paid for generating energy, they should be paid for, or find business models in which they are paid for the outcome that energy generates, like comfort within a room, right? Or kilometers of transportation, so that they can build energy efficiency into their own business models, right? So I think we need to think more about energy efficiency. The discussion we had at the agency in Paris, we didn't have a lot of discussion on energy efficiency. I think we need to put more effort on that. I think the technologies are there. I think the incentives and the business models, we need to think about them more. And also we're putting effort on electromobility. In public transportation especially, it's very important because it's profitable. Santiago is the city outside China with more electric buses in the world. I mean, there are many Chinese cities with more buses than Santiago still, but they're much bigger. Because there it's easier, because as buses, I mean, obviously travel long distances, you can pay the capex with the savings in OPEX, right? But in the private sector, for a developing country like ours, it's harder because they are still too expensive. But I think those are the main issues. I think there's also an issue that is important, which is the timing of governments, so the political cycles, and the cycles of these things we need to do. So we're trying to build a broad consensus around this plan to make sure that once we're not in office, whoever is there gives continuity to that plan and broad support. I think that's also important.
Thank you very much. I think the energy efficiency point, I tried to start with it as rightly, it's hugely important. We need 3% per year energy efficiency improvements to be Paris compliant. In our last report, we saw that globally we had 1.3%. So the investment, which happened a bit stronger a few years ago, have slowed down. So we need another push on that. But before we close, we have a few minutes, I think 2 or 3, to allow a few questions and then the panel to give a very short final statement at the end. There is one person here and a lady here. And I try to go ahead. So let's maybe take the questions together, and then I give the floor to the panel.
My name is Jochen Wermuth. I'm with the German Sovereign Wealth Fund, KENFO, and Atommüllentsorgungsfondsanlageausschuss in German, if you know the long word. The key debate in Germany today is on the carbon price. There's a difference between the effective price, which gets you to stop coal, 50, and the efficient price. As an economist, we want to be sure the prices are efficient, i.e. they reflect the externalities caused. The German Environmental Agency estimates today that 1 ton of CO2 emitted today causes 640 euros of damages the next 100 years. In a country like Germany, with 0 interest rates, that should not be discounted. So the efficient CO2 price is 640 euros a ton. The question now comes, is the social aspect. If an average German consumes 10 tons per capita, if I give him back all the tax taken at the beginning of the year, 6,400 euros of cash, they can spend it. If they save money, they have cash in the bank. If they want to drive 5 SUVs, they pay a bit more. So what do you think about an efficient CO2 price at 640, which is what we need to really get things done and get to zero emissions by 2030, which is what we really need? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's come back on that in a minute. There was a lady here, please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the panel. My name is Shakti Ramkumar, and I work with Student Energy. We're a global nonprofit. So we've seen young people mobilize millions of people for climate action, and they show the broad support for the decarbonization policies, and they can help build the political will that many of you labeled as a barrier. So my question is, how are you working with young people to accelerate the energy transition? Because we often see that we see nice statements that they're heard, but not invited to meaningfully work together. So how are you working with them, and what are your plans to do so? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the question here, and then I give the floor back.
Thank you. Max Horstink, Mindshift Matters. You've been talking about what the government can do for the private sector. I'm interested to hear both from the government and the private sector, and in light of the finance gap, especially also for developing countries who have conditional targets, what would be the importance for governments to develop a vision on how to finance their NDCs, to develop a national climate finance strategy, to develop sectoral investment plans? Would that send a message to the marketplace? Would that make private sector invest more in low carbon? Thank you.
Thank you very
Sorry,
much.
and would there be an opportunity for private sector and the government to work together on that as well?
Okay. Thank you very much. If there's no more urgent question, I would like to give the floor to the panelist who wants to go first on efficient carbon pricing, on how to integrate the youth. And the last question, Christian, you wanted to take?
I can start. I think it's probably correct that the external cost for every ton of carbon could well be in the order of 600 euros per ton, not 50. The problem is we need to be realistic in finding a balance here. There will be so much extra costs that one is not able to offset with paying people back in a fair way in a short time. So that's why I think we should aim for a realistic high carbon price that is high enough to make a real difference, but not so high that we are causing yellow vests all over the world. But if we are only thinking about climate, we should price it at 10 times 50. Yeah, I think I'll also give one closing statement from my side, and that is there are 3 reasons to go for renewable energy. One is to fight climate change. The second is it is locally produced, so it is self-production in every country, in Spain and Chile and wherever it is, and also for businesses and private people who invest here. And the third reason, it is lasting forever. The equipment needs to be replaced, but the rain and the sun and the wind will always be here, so it will last into eternity.
Thank you. Already, Ken, or you want to come in?
Yeah.
With the final.
The second question, integrating the youth. I think we need the power of younger generation, and especially what we are working on is we say that we are the energy company for millennials. So we recruit the talents around the world as potential country managers, and we are targeting more than 190 countries by 2030. So we need 190 country managers, which is with passion and the talents. And we are starting to create a program to develop professional renewable developers. And that I believe that this will be one of the role model for the really deployment of renewable energies.
Thank you very much. You're a young company, so you're looking also for young country representatives. So
yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Let me first Itai and the last word from Minister.
I think that it took us a generation to get people to care, and the young people are the ones that drive us. My kids are what drive me to make this better. And I know that for us at ITRON, it's extremely important to bring young people and new generation into the company, and that's part of the diversity that I mentioned before, and that's why it's really so important.
Fully agree. And our last statement from the Minister.
So I really agree that we need to involve younger generations. There's a, intergenerational, fairness problem at the core of this discussion. We don't have time to get deeper there, but I think that's very, very important. I think as they increasingly vote, they will mobilize, their political leaders to be serious about this. And I hope that happens quickly, because we don't have a lot of time, and we see many countries that should play a very relevant role that are not doing enough. And I think voters in the following elections can play a very important role. And on the financial part, we are developing a plan in Chile with very specific measures, sector by sector. And we are engaging the industries to be able to develop those plans together, right? I'm very skeptical about governments designing solutions in a bubble and then communicating it to sectors. That won't happen. I think it's also very important to bring in the financial resources required. More than the government setting up a framework to get that financing, is for the government to put in place the policies that make sure that the technologies are applied in a sequence that makes sure that the most profitable ones are adopted earlier and the more expensive ones later on. If you have, for example, in Chile, renewable energies get the financing they need because they are profitable, right? If we wanted to push, let's say, private cars, electric private cars, which are very expensive, and unless you travel more than 30,000 kilometers per year, it's not worth the investment. I don't think we should be spending time and effort and public money there, right? So the sequence of how you implement measures, I think in terms of profitability, private profitability, is very important, and I think we have enough room there to push technologies that are already profitable, to then leave the room for the private sector and the financial sector to set up the solutions for those investments to happen.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much also, Minister, for being the president of COP25. I think that is an important role also Chile took over and to be here. We have to conclude now. There's some time pressure. So I would like to thank the panelists. I think we learned future of energy is now here today with a lot of technologies, with the involvement of everyone, including the youth, or in particularly the youth, which are not only voters, they are also employees in the company, in the private sector. So there's a pressure also coming directly there. But I would like to thank everybody, Statkraft, Ida, and Itai and Ken. And looking forward to the next discussions here today. And thank you very much for participation and questions. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. So if you can enjoy the break and the new company around you, please listen for the bell. We've got a lot to get through today, so we'll start prompt on the close of the bell, hopefully around 11:30. Thank you.